For 4,500 years, we have been asking the wrong question about the Great Pyramid of Giza. We have asked, how did they lift the stones? How many workers did it take? Where did the ramps go? Why can we find no trace of them? And the answer, according to a radical new study published this year, is that we were looking in the wrong place the whole time. The ramps were never outside the pyramid. The machinery was never external. The workforce did not drag stones up hundreds of feet of desert sand using rollers and muscle alone. Because the Great Pyramid of Giza was not a passive monument built by laborers. It was a machine that built itself. This is the conclusion of a peer-reviewed paper published in NPJ Heritage Science, written by a scientist who, until recently, spent his career studying the invisible membranes inside human cells. A biophysicist, not an Egyptologist, not an archaeologist, a man who looks at how proteins hold themselves together at the microscopic level, and who, in his spare time, looked at the Great Pyramid and saw something nobody else had seen. His name is Dr. Simon Andreas Scheuring, and what he has proposed is so radical that it sounds, at first, like science fiction. It is not. It is physics. And once you see the evidence the way he sees it, you will never look at the Great Pyramid the same way again. Tonight, we are going to show you the machine. This is Pharaoh's legacy. Before we show you the machine, we have to explain why we needed one in the first place. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built during the reign of the pharaoh Khufu, second king of Egypt's 4th dynasty. His reign lasted somewhere between 23 and 26 years, depending on which ancient source you trust. When he died, the pyramid was already complete, or very nearly so. That means his builders had, at the absolute outside, about 26 years to finish the largest stone structure in human history. Let us put that number in context. The pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million individual blocks of limestone and granite. It stands 146 meters tall, 480 feet, and for 38 centuries, until the completion of Lincoln Cathedral in the year 1311, it was the tallest human-made structure on Earth. The smallest blocks weigh around 2 tons. The largest, the granite slabs that form the ceiling of the king's chamber, weigh up to 60 tons. That is 60,000 kilograms. Roughly the weight of 8 adult African elephants stacked on top of each other. And these 60-ton stones had to be lifted with astonishing precision to a height of more than 42 meters above the desert floor. Now do the math. 26 years, 2.3 million blocks. If you assume the builders worked every single day without rest from the first year of Khufu's reign to the last, they had to place, on average, 1 new block roughly every 3 minutes. Some calculations go further. They suggest the actual pace during peak construction was 1 block every single minute. 1 block every minute. Some weighing 2 tons, some weighing 60. For 26 years, without steel tools, without wheels in any practical form, without pulleys, because, according to the conventional chronology, the block and tackle pulley had not yet been invented. This is the oldest question in engineering history, and until this year, nobody, not a single mainstream Egyptologist, could answer it in a way the numbers would accept. For most of the last 2 centuries, the standard answer has been ramps. The theory, in its simplest form, goes like this. The ancient Egyptians built a massive external ramp of earth and rubble that ran alongside the rising pyramid. Workers dragged the blocks up this ramp on wooden sledges, lubricated with water or animal fat to reduce friction, then slid them into place at the top. As the pyramid grew, the ramp grew with it. When the pyramid was finished, the ramp was dismantled. Simple, elegant. And at first glance, it sounds plausible. There is just one problem with this theory. Mathematically, it is impossible. To keep the slope of the ramp gentle enough that humans could drag a 60-ton block up it, the ramp would have to extend for kilometers. Modern engineering calculations show that a straight external ramp tall enough to reach the top of the Great Pyramid would, at a practical incline, need to be longer than the pyramid itself is wide. It would have required a volume of earth and rubble roughly equal to, or greater than, the volume of the pyramid itself. Think about that for a moment. To build a monument of 2.3 million blocks, you would first have to build a temporary structure of comparable size. And then, when the pyramid was finished, you would have to tear that temporary structure down and make it vanish without a trace. Because here is the thing. Archaeologists have searched the entire Giza plateau, every square meter, with ground-penetrating radar, with satellite imagery, with traditional excavation, and they have found no evidence, none, of a ramp anywhere near the scale required by the external ramp theory. Later variations of the theory tried to work around this. Some proposed a zigzag ramp that wrapped around the pyramid as it rose. Others proposed an internal spiral ramp hidden within the outer casing of the pyramid itself. In 2007, a French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin produced a detailed computer model of such an internal spiral, and it remains one of the most sophisticated alternatives ever proposed. But none of these models can fully explain the pace, not the speed, not the precision, and certainly not the 60-ton granite slabs above the king's chamber. For 2 centuries, we have been building more and more elaborate versions of the ramp theory, because the ramp theory was the only one we had, and every version has failed the same test. The math does not work. Which brings us to Dr. Simon Andreas Scheuring. Scheuring is not the kind of person you would expect to overturn 2 centuries of Egyptology. He was born in Basel, Switzerland. He trained as a biologist. He earned his doctorate in biochemistry. His entire professional career has been spent inside laboratories, staring through microscopes at the invisible architecture of human cells. Specifically, Scheuring is a world expert in atomic force microscopy, a technique that lets scientists feel the shape of individual proteins the way a blind person feels the shape of a face. He studies how membranes hold proteins in place, how molecules move across cell walls, how the smallest structures in biology perform mechanical work. In 2017, he became professor of physiology and biophysics at Weill Cornell Medicine in New York City. He has won major international research awards. He has published hundreds of papers on how tiny biological machines function at the molecular scale. And that phrase, tiny biological machines, is the key to everything that follows. Because Scheuring has spent his entire career thinking about structures that perform their own work. Membranes that fold themselves, proteins that move themselves, biological systems that use mechanical forces, tension, compression, gravity, to accomplish complex tasks without any external machinery. When Scheuring looked at the Great Pyramid of Giza, he did not see what Egyptologists see. He did not see a ceremonial tomb covered in mysterious passages. He did not see religious symbolism. He did not see a monument. He saw a device, a mechanism, a structure that to his trained eye was clearly designed to do work, the same way a protein is designed to do work, or a membrane is designed to do work. And once he started thinking about the pyramid as a machine instead of as a monument, everything began to fit. The passages that Egyptologists had spent 200 years trying to interpret as ceremonial or symbolic or theological, Scheuring began to interpret as functional, as moving parts. And what he proposed in his paper published in late 2025 in the journal NPJ Heritage Science is that the ancient Egyptians did not need external ramps. They did not need impossible workforces. They did not need technology we cannot explain. They needed one thing. They needed gravity. And the pyramid itself, from the moment it began to rise from the bedrock, was designed to use gravity against itself. Before we walk through the machine, we need to agree on one piece of physics, And it is the simplest, most intuitive piece of physics humans ever discovered, a counterweight system. Here is how it works. You have two objects connected by a rope. The rope runs over a beam or a wheel or a simple fulcrum at the top. When the heavier object falls on one side, gravity pulls it downward, and that downward force is transferred through the rope into an upward force on the other side. If the descending weight is heavy enough, it can lift the object on the other side into the air. This is not advanced technology. Children understand it intuitively. Medieval castles used it for drawbridges. Ancient Roman theatres used it for stage machinery. And, critically for our story, it requires no wheels, no gears, no metal components. It requires only three things: a heavy weight, a rope, and a surface to redirect the force. A beam, a stone lip, anything that can take the strain. Now, look at the Great Pyramid of Giza. Really look at it, because inside that pyramid, there are two long, straight, sloped corridors running at an angle of 26 degrees. They are called the Ascending Passage and the Grand Gallery. For 2 centuries, Egyptologists have argued about what they were for: a ceremonial path for the pharaoh's soul, a symbolic representation of the journey to the stars, a structural accident. Scheuring looked at them and saw something else. He saw 2 parallel ramps, 2 sloped surfaces, perfectly aligned, designed to let a heavy object slide downward under the force of gravity, while a rope attached to that heavy object pulled something else upward at the other end. A counterweight system, built directly into the core of the pyramid, invisible from the outside, hiding in plain sight for 4,500 years. The Grand Gallery is, by common consent, the most mysterious chamber inside the Great Pyramid. It is approximately 47 meters long. It slopes upward at 26 degrees. Its ceiling is made of 7 overlapping layers of corbelled limestone, each one projecting slightly inward from the one below, until they meet at a narrow peak almost 9 meters above the floor. It is, visually, one of the most impressive architectural spaces in the ancient world, and it is completely empty. There are no inscriptions on its walls, no sarcophagus, no burial goods, nothing to suggest what it was for. Egyptologists have proposed dozens of theories: a chamber for ritual procession, a symbolic star shaft, a storage space for building materials, a gallery for mourners. None of these theories has ever explained why the chamber is so specifically shaped, why the ceiling corbels in that particular pattern, why the floor slopes at that particular angle, why the walls have the proportions they do. But look carefully at the floor. Look at the walls, and you will see something that every visitor to the Great Pyramid has walked past for centuries without noticing: scratch marks, polished surfaces, deep parallel grooves worn into the stone. These are the kind of marks that are left behind when something very heavy slides over a stone surface repeatedly over a long period of time. Not foot traffic, not ceremonial processions, not ritual activity. These are the unmistakable traces of large wooden sledges bearing massive loads, dragged up and down the slope of the gallery. Scheuring's interpretation is straightforward. The Grand Gallery was not a ceremonial space. It was a working surface, a sloped ramp designed to accommodate the movement of heavy counterweights. The corbelled ceiling was not symbolic. It was structural, designed to give clearance for the massive blocks being slid along the gallery floor. The precise angle was not spiritual, it was mechanical, the optimal slope for converting the weight of a descending counterweight into the force needed to lift another stone block elsewhere in the pyramid. And the rope. This is where it gets beautiful. The ropes from the descending counterweights would have run up the slope of the gallery, over wooden beams set into notches carved in the upper walls, and then down through vertical shafts into the growing body of the pyramid. On the other end of each rope, a new block being lifted into place. The force of one stone falling transferred through a simple rope and beam system into the force of another stone rising. And what happens when the counterweight reaches the bottom of the gallery? You uncouple it. You drag it back to the top, empty and therefore lighter, and you attach a new block to the other end of the rope, and the cycle begins again. A machine, a self-contained lifting system built directly into the architecture of the pyramid, using the pyramid's own passages as moving parts. But the Grand Gallery was only one part of the machine, and to understand the next part, we need to walk through a space that, for 200 years, has been one of the strangest unsolved mysteries inside the Great Pyramid, the Antechamber. The Antechamber is a small granite room. It sits directly in front of the king's chamber, guarding the entrance. It is only about 3 meters long, and it contains one of the most peculiar architectural features in the entire pyramid. 3 vertical slots carved into opposite walls, with stone grooves running down into them, and gaps near the ceiling that look exactly like the housings for wooden beams. The traditional interpretation, held by mainstream Egyptology for over a century, is that these slots were designed to hold massive granite portcullis blocks, stone barriers that could be dropped down into place to seal the king's chamber after Khufu's burial, protecting the pharaoh's body from tomb robbers. It is a reasonable theory, it fits the general idea of pyramid security, and it has only one problem. The slots are designed in a way that would have made it essentially impossible to lower portcullis blocks into them from the outside without the blocks getting stuck. The mechanism makes no sense as a security system, but Scheuring looked at the same slots, the same grooves, the same beam housings, and he saw something different. He saw a hoist. In Scheuring's reconstruction, the wooden beams that fit into the upper slots of the antechamber were not part of a security system. They were lifting beams, structural supports over which thick ropes could be threaded to form a pulley-like mechanism. The grooves in the walls guided the ascending blocks. The vertical slots allowed the ropes to travel upward through the structure, and the pulley system itself provided the final mechanical advantage needed to lift the heaviest stones in the entire pyramid, the 60-ton granite slabs of the king's chamber ceiling, into their final resting places. Think about what this means. For over a century, we have been looking at the antechamber and trying to explain its strange features in terms of defense, security, or ritual symbolism. Scheuring is the first person to interpret them in terms of simple mechanical function. And once you do, everything lines up. The slots are the right size, the grooves are in the right places, the beam housings match the proportions you would expect from a functional lifting system. It is as if, for 4,500 years, the pyramid has been holding up a sign that says, "Here is the hoist," and we simply were not reading the language. Now we come to the most radical part of Scheuring's proposal, the part that genuinely changes how we understand the construction process from beginning to end. If the pyramid's internal passages were functional machinery, if the Grand Gallery was a counterweight ramp and the antechamber was a hoist, then those passages had to be built first. They had to exist before the blocks they were designed to lift were even in position. Otherwise, the whole system could not have worked. Which means the pyramid was not built the way we have been drawing it for 200 years. It was not a simple matter of workers starting at the ground and piling up layers, one on top of the next, until they reached the top. Scheuring proposes that the Great Pyramid was built from the inside out. From a central starting point, a kind of spine running along the vertical axis of the monument, expanding upward and outward in phases. Each phase used the previous phase as its own machinery. Each stage of the pyramid helped build the next stage. The construction in this model is a kind of choreography. First, the builders established the central core, including the descending passage, the ascending passage, and the lower portion of the Grand Gallery. These become the first machines, the lifting systems for the next phase. Then, using those first machines, the builders construct the king's chamber, the antechamber, and the upper Grand Gallery. Now they have a larger, more powerful system. They use that system to lift the 60-ton granite slabs into place. They use it to build the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. And with each new internal structure, the machine grows. The outer casing of the pyramid expands around the core. The lifting capacity increases as the pyramid itself rises. By the time the builders are working on the upper courses, where the blocks are smaller because they do not need to be as large, the machine is at its most powerful, and the final blocks can be placed with relative ease. This is why the pyramid's major chambers are not where you would expect them to be. For decades, Egyptologists have noted a strange anomaly in the Great Pyramid's internal layout. The King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, all of the major internal features cluster along a vertical axis, but they are not perfectly centered. The King's Chamber sits noticeably south of the pyramid's true center. The Queen's Chamber is on the north-south axis, but slightly offset east-west. The whole interior arrangement looks slightly lopsided, as if the architects were working around constraints we cannot see. Scheuring's theory explains this perfectly. The chambers are not centered because the chambers were never meant to be centered. They were placed wherever the lifting machinery needed them to be. The off-center layout is not an aesthetic choice. It is a mechanical consequence of building the pyramid around a working construction machine. The pyramid's architecture is, literally, the fossil of its own construction process. Every odd angle, every off-center chamber, every strange grove in the stone, they are all records of the machinery that built them. If this is blowing your mind as much as it blew ours when we first read the paper, do us a small favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. We spend weeks researching each episode, and every new subscriber tells the algorithm that this kind of careful, evidence-based look at ancient history is worth spreading. And drop your reaction in the comments. We read every single one. Every major scientific theory needs physical evidence. You cannot simply propose a new model and expect the world to accept it. You have to show your work. You have to point to something real, something anyone can walk over and touch, and say, "This is why my theory is right." And this is where Scheuring's proposal becomes extraordinary. Because the physical evidence for his theory has been sitting in the Great Pyramid the entire time, visible to every tourist who has ever climbed the Grand Gallery, documented in photographs for over a century, ignored or misinterpreted by everyone who has ever tried to explain the monument. Start with the scratches and wear marks. Along the lower walls and floor of the Grand Gallery, there are deep parallel scratch marks, polished surfaces, grooves that have been worn into the limestone by repeated contact with something large, heavy, and moving in a consistent direction. Archaeologists have known about these marks for decades. They have photographed them, they have measured them. The standard explanation, when one was offered at all, was foot traffic, ritual processions, pilgrimage, workers during the final phase of construction. None of these explanations quite fit, because foot traffic does not carve deep parallel grooves into solid limestone. Foot traffic polishes surfaces. It does not scour them. What does scour deep parallel grooves into limestone? Large wooden sledges, loaded with heavy stone blocks, dragged repeatedly up and down the same surface. Exactly the kind of mechanical wear you would expect if the Grand Gallery were being used as a counterweight ramp, with massive loads sliding up and down it thousands of times over the course of construction. The wear marks are not decoration. They are not accidents. They are the mechanical signature of a working machine, preserved in stone for 4,500 years. The second piece of evidence is the one we already touched on, the off-center layout of the pyramid's internal chambers. And now that you have heard Scheuring's full theory, you can see why this is not a minor detail. It is a smoking gun. When you build a monumental structure from the ground up using external ramps, the traditional model, There is no mechanical reason to place the internal chambers off-center. You would put the pharaoh's burial chamber in the middle because the middle is the most symbolically powerful location. You would center the queen's chamber along both axes. You would make the whole thing symmetrical because symmetry is both aesthetically pleasing and structurally sound. But the Great Pyramid is not symmetrical. The king's chamber is south of center. The queen's chamber is offset east-west. The Grand Gallery is offset from the structural heart of the monument. These are not small deviations. They are large, deliberate, and, under the traditional model, completely unexplained. Under Scheuring's model, they are explained immediately. The chambers are placed wherever the construction machinery needed them to be. The lifting systems required specific geometries, specific distances between the counterweight ramps, the hoist points, and the chambers being assembled. The architects had no choice in where to put the interior rooms. The machine dictated the plan. The Great Pyramid is off-center because it was not designed by artists. It was designed by engineers solving a mechanical problem. And engineers, faced with a mechanical problem, place their components wherever the physics requires, not wherever the eye would prefer. The third piece of evidence is something that tourists notice but never ask about. As you climb the Great Pyramid, as your eyes travel from the massive blocks at the base toward the narrow summit, the stones get smaller. The blocks at the lowest courses are enormous. Some of them weigh close to 10 tons. By the time you reach the middle of the pyramid, the average block has dropped to around 2.5 tons. Near the summit, the blocks are smaller still, sometimes less than a ton. The standard explanation for this is logistical. The Egyptians used larger blocks at the base because the base bears more weight, and they used smaller blocks higher up because smaller blocks are easier to transport to greater heights. This explanation is not wrong, but it is incomplete, because under the ramp theory, you would expect the block sizes to be determined by structural engineering alone, by how much weight each level needs to support. Under Scheuring's theory, they are also determined by something else entirely: the lifting capacity of the machine. As the pyramid grows, the internal counterweight and pulley system becomes more efficient, but only for certain block sizes. The higher you go, the less mechanical advantage is available from the internal ramps, because the counterweights have less distance to slide. So the blocks at the higher levels have to be smaller, not because of structural necessity alone, but because of the physical limits of the machine doing the lifting. The block size gradient we see in the Great Pyramid is not a stylistic choice. It is a mechanical fingerprint. And finally, the strangest piece of evidence of all, a feature of the Great Pyramid that is so subtle that for thousands of years, almost nobody noticed it. The four faces of the Great Pyramid are not flat. In 1940, a British Royal Air Force pilot named P. Groves was flying over the Giza Plateau at a specific time of day, around the spring or autumn equinox, when the sun strikes the pyramid at a very particular angle. And for a few minutes, he saw something nobody had ever photographed before. Each of the pyramid's four faces, from the air, appeared to be divided down the middle by a faint vertical line. Each face was, in fact, slightly concave. The Great Pyramid, seen from above, is not a four-sided monument. It is an eight-sided one. The concavity is tiny, roughly 0.5 meter across each face. It is invisible from ground level. It only appears when the sun is at the right angle to cast a faint shadow along the central line of each face. And for decades, Egyptologists have argued about what it means. A deliberate aesthetic choice? A structural feature to resist erosion? An accidental consequence of construction method? Under Scheuring's theory, the concavity has a simple mechanical explanation. If the pyramid was built from a central core outward in phases, then the outer casing blocks would have been placed in coordinated waves rather than in continuous horizontal courses. Each phase of construction would have left a faint seam along the central axis of each face, a place where one phase's blocks met the next phase's blocks. Over centuries of weathering and erosion, those seams would become slightly recessed, giving each face the subtle concave appearance we see today. The eight-sided pyramid is not a mystery. It is a fossil, the last visible trace of a construction process that proceeded outward from a central machine, leaving its fingerprints on the monument's own surface. We owe you honesty. Scheuring's theory is not universally accepted. It cannot be, because it was published only months ago, and major scientific claims require years of debate, replication, and testing before they are absorbed into the mainstream. Some Egyptologists have pushed back. They point out that Scheuring is not a specialist in ancient Egyptian construction methods. They note that the physical evidence he cites, the wear marks, the off-center chambers, the block size gradient, has been observed for decades and interpreted in other ways by trained archaeologists. They argue that the simple fact that a non-specialist has proposed a radical new theory does not automatically make that theory correct. These are legitimate criticisms, and Scheuring himself, to his credit, has been careful in his language. His paper does not claim to have proven the machine model. It claims to have proposed it as a physically plausible alternative to the traditional ramp theories, one that explains features of the pyramid those theories cannot. The next phase of the debate would involve detailed engineering simulations, peer-reviewed replication of the counterweight calculations, and, crucially, a fresh examination of the physical evidence inside the pyramid itself. Egyptologists will need to go back into the Grand Gallery with Scheuring's theory in mind and ask, does what we see on these walls fit a mechanical interpretation, or does it fit a ceremonial one? If the evidence lines up, Scheuring will have achieved what centuries of mainstream Egyptology could not. He will have explained how the Great Pyramid was built, not with speculation, not with mysticism, but with physics. Step back for a moment, because whether or not Scheuring's specific model is correct in every detail, something important has happened with this paper. For over 2,000 years, the Great Pyramid of Giza has been a kind of intellectual Rorschach test for every civilization that has tried to explain it. The ancient Greeks thought it was the work of tyrants and slaves. The Romans thought it was a granary built by the biblical Joseph. Medieval Arab scholars thought it contained the wisdom of the antediluvian world. Victorian mystics thought it encoded prophecies of the future. And modern fringe theorists have proposed everything from alien intervention to lost civilizations with forgotten technology. What all of these explanations have in common is a refusal to believe what the evidence actually says, which is this: the Great Pyramid was built by human beings, with human tools, within a human time frame, by a civilization that was, at the height of the Fourth Dynasty, the most sophisticated engineering culture on Earth. Scheuring's theory is a return to that basic principle. The ancient Egyptians did not need magic. They did not need aliens. They did not need lost technologies. They needed gravity, ropes, wooden beams, and a deep understanding of mechanical advantage, which they clearly possessed because their monuments are still standing 45 centuries later. What we have underestimated for 2,000 years is not the difficulty of the task. It is the intelligence of the people who solved it. Here is where the story of the Great Pyramid goes from here. Scheuring's paper has opened a door that will not close again. Engineers and physicists around the world are already running their own calculations on the counterweight model. Archaeologists are going back into the Grand Gallery with laser scanners and photogrammetric cameras, documenting the wear marks in new detail. Structural simulations are being built to test whether the proposed machine could, in fact, have moved a 60-ton granite block from the quarry floor to the ceiling of the king's chamber, within the mechanical tolerances of ancient materials. Some of those tests will confirm Scheuring's theory. Some may falsify parts of it. The model will evolve. Details will be added. Details will be removed. This is how science works, slowly, carefully, through the patient accumulation of evidence. But the core insight of the paper, that the Great Pyramid was not a passive object built by laborers, but an active machine built from the inside out, using its own architecture to lift its own blocks. That insight is unlikely to go away. It fits the evidence too well. It solves too many problems. It turns too many unexplained features of the monument into functional components of a single, unified system. For 4,500 years, we have been standing at the base of the Great Pyramid, looking up and asking the wrong question. We have been asking, how did they lift the stones? The right question, it turns out, was never about lifting, it was about falling. Because the secret of the Great Pyramid is not that the ancient Egyptians found a way to defeat gravity, it is that they found a way to make gravity work for them, a way to turn the weight of descending stones into the force required to raise new ones, a way to make the monument participate in its own construction. Every block in that pyramid was lifted by the block that came before it. Every chamber was built by the chamber beneath it. Every phase of construction was powered by the phase that preceded it. The Great Pyramid of Giza was not built the way a house is built. It was built the way a living thing grows, from the inside out, using its own body as its own tool. It is, perhaps, the most elegant solution to an impossible problem that any civilization has ever devised. And it has been hiding in plain sight, inside the most famous monument on Earth, for 4.5 millennia, waiting for someone with fresh eyes to finally see it. Subscribe to Pharaoh's Legacy, hit the bell, and join us next time, because the past is not finished giving up its secrets. It is only beginning. Until then, keep looking up at the stones. They are still telling us how they got there.